Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar series, our tea break series, as we used to call them. My name is Ilias. I work here at Flourish, and I have, of course, a cup from Ukraine with a very nice beverage in it, in order to keep me company in this session that's about to cover one of our behemoth templates, the scatter template, which is quite modular, quite powerful visualization template that's also quite big and with quite a few different options and things that you do with it. So we must press on. If you have any questions, as my colleagues kindly dropped in the chat, don't hesitate to reach out to them through the chat if you have anything on your screen. So allow me to start sharing my screen. I hope you are seeing what I'm saying. Great. So yeah, as we mentioned, allow me to minimize the video thumbnail. Doesn't make any sense to watch myself. Yeah, as I said today, we will be going through the basic features of the scatter template, which is a template that has quite a lot of different functionalities in it, and you can empower it for quite different purposes. And today's agenda, we will be focusing on the basic scatter template options. We'll be using a real-life, a bit dirty data set, and we will be essentially building a scatter by beginning and adding and binding our data, which in the scatter template there are some things that we have to be a bit more conscious of than in other templates. We will be going through the structure of our visualization and how we will be able to polish and make our scatter look better and easier on the eyes. And also we'll be briefly going through how we can switch to a different scatter visualization, a different kind of scatter visualization inside of the template without switching to a different starting point. And finally, we will be presenting a brief overview of quite numerous scatter template starting points that are available. But first, as in all things, and especially scatter that has all these different starting points and different options, we should be asking ourselves, when should I be using scatter? And and essentially in a few lines, scatter plots are better in order to be able to observe relationships between two variables. That's the basic thing that a scatter plot can do, and that's when it should be used, when you have two variables that you want to present their relationship. And also it is able to accommodate time as a third dimension, and we will be hearing about this more in a moment. And also it's quite useful for presenting a multitude and different levels of information in one go besides these two variables. As we can see, we can not only present, for example, what we see on the X and the Y axis, but quite a lot of other depths of data that are available in our dataset using the scatter template. And if we're not sure if something is looking as it should have been, it's better to try different scatter plot starting points or different kinds of scatter plot inside of the visualization, and you will be seeing what I mean very soon. And also, when we wish to make a scatter, we should ask some brief questions. Of course, what are the two variables that I seek to demonstrate the relationship? What essentially what it should be on the y and on the x-axis? Is there a value that it's better to size and color our points or our shapes on? Because there's also the ability to size our data points and color them based on different categories. So that's another addition to what we should be thinking about when we want to make a scatter template. Of course, we should be asking ourselves, is there a time element in there? And if yes, there should be specific provisions taken in order to present it seamlessly in the scatter template. You will be see what I mean in our example that we will get cracking on immediately. And also, if there is another way, a better way to showcase this using another scatter starting point. So let's get cracking. First of all, let's start with a tip, because when you upload your data in the scatter template, there's always a danger to start by plotting the wrong values. If we can see what I mean here. We will be using today our bubble chart scatter starting point, and let's pick this. As we can see, there are some default bindings there, and if we upload our dataset, which I will not do here in order to demonstrate it immediately, there's always an option to start plotting a lot of values that can significantly slow down the chart. And this is particularly relevant for the scatter template, because more often than not, the scatter datasets are quite big. So what I would recommend is deactivate the default column bindings and then reactivate them when you have uploaded your dataset. So essentially, you start from a clean slate, because as you can see here, we have all these legends that got created and all these data points that, yeah, it would have frozen the browser for at least, 30 to 1 minute, which is not ideal. So let's start by uploading our data. Our dataset is a dataset containing child mortality and GDP data taken from our world in data that have curated data from different data sets. So we have a country name, a country code name, a year, total population of said country, the continent that this country group belongs to, real GDP per capita, and the child mortality rate. So let's start by adding our data that we have already did, and we should be asking ourselves, what are the two values, the X and Y value that we should be plotting? And in this case, we want to showcase the relationship between GDP and child mortality. So X values should be column F, real GDP per capita. Y values should be child mortality. And also another tip, it's better if we have values for quite a number of years and quite a big data set. It's better to start with the filters, if there are any, because this way the scatter template can avoid plotting everything in one go. So let's start with our year. The time column is, as we can see, C, and then the Y values is column G, child mortality, and name column is A. Continuing, we should decide on selecting our size and color columns, and essentially choose which columns should be used in order to size our data points, and we should be coloring our data points here that now all look kind of boring and all blue. We should be coloring them based on the continent, column E, and sizing them by population, column D. As we can see now, it looks way, way better. And drilling a bit further down on the styling options, as we can see, there are different options and about the opacity of our dots, and we are able to choose between different shapes of our data points, between triangle, Y, even. Let's stick with cycles for now. And we can also, and importantly, set on the minimum and the maximum size of our data points. So as we can see here, some data points are quite minuscule. So it's better to increase the minimum to 20, for example. And as we can see, yeah, and turn this to 1000 in order to have a bit more, yeah, in order to the scales not to be so divergent between them. As we can see now, there's a different problem that we face, and this problem is that most of our y-axis values, the child mortality, the values do not go above, above 130, 150, and all this area is essentially empty. That kind of scrunches our data to the bottom of the axis. So it should be best to head to the y-axis options and choose between a linear and a logarithmic scale. And since we have quite a big array of y-axis data, we can switch to logarithmic one, which makes it way more, it makes more sense this way, and set the max. As we can see, most of our data are below the 200 y-axis values, and set this to 200. And this looks way better now. One problem finished. So as we can see, also there's another thing that we should face head on, and it's the fact that these are essentially percentages data that are not that we must turn them into percentage data, and we can do this by continuing working on the y-axis options, head over to number styling, add a percentage suffix. But now we have, essentially now we have quite a lot of numbers, and it's better to, one way to face this is turn on the advanced number styling options and then head to multiply or divide values. And this way we can choose between different options of some basic calculations to be done to the y-axis values. Now we can divide the values by 100, and we can see that now it makes much more sense. Our data are correctly plotted. And if you remember, we're mentioning that we must always think if we have time data, that in this case we do. And let's see how our date data are. We have a column named year that we have already used, and because of this we have this slider appearing. But if we see our time data are not exactly sorted, we have 2015 here, we have different years here, and then again 1804 as in the beginning. It is a real world example. It's not sorted according to year, and as we can see, if we switch between different years using the slider, the years are not in order. So how should we approach this? Once we decide on what year we want to focus on, it should be 2015 in this case. So now we are on 2015 and we want to present the 2015 data. We could use a different year, but 2015 will do for now. So if we head to the control styles options, we can essentially kind of a hacky way to make the slider disappear by removing and setting as 0 the width and the label and the height. So now, as we can see, there's no slider in there. So we just have the 2015 data. And in the time slider options, we can switch on or off the time label. That in this case, when we have opted to present data for just 1 year, there's no reason for the time label to be there. And also, as we can see, the next issue is that, Antarctica, in the legend, Antarctica doesn't see a lot of infants, does it? So we can head over to the legend options, where we have quite a few different options about making the legend appear above or below, or it should be clickable or not. And through the custom order override of the legend, we can essentially rearrange and decide on what should be the order of our legend categories. So Asia, Europe, Africa, Oceania, North America, and South America. should do without Antarctica. As we can see now, it's gone. And another, as I mentioned, the scatter template, it is not just about these two dimensions and this the relation that you can have between the X and Y axis. It can accommodate quite a lot more, as we saw. It can accommodate time, different categories, and another depth of data can be added through the filtering options with, as we see here in the filter control column binding. We can choose, in this case, the continent, again, just in order to demonstrate that we can choose between different continents and just get a scatter plot focused on said continent. And a bit more advanced, what we should do if we want to showcase how different continents fare, how to make these countries grouped on the axis according to their continent in order to be able to more clearly see how these continents are faring regarding child mortality rates in 2015. There's a set of options in the box violin beesworm plots that allow you to tell to the template that when one of the two axes contains categorical data, make a beesworm or a box plot or a violin plot automatically. So let's turn on the setting that it can pick up categorical data for one of the two X or Y axis and plot them immediately in a different kind of scatter plot. So let's see how we can make this into a continent grouping. Our Y values is child mortality, so this should be this should remain the same, and our X values should be the continents. As we can see here, very easily and immediately we created a box plot based, by grouping the different values according to their continent, and see essentially in this kind of horizontal scatter plot the countries that the continents that have their countries more to the right side of the x-axis have higher mortality rate than the ones on the left that have lower child mortality rate. And the same should be happening using the box plot or the violin plot, but in this case it don't make that much sense for this type of visualization. And as we are nearing the end, we should be briefly going through our different starting points and enumerate what are the differences and what they do. We have our basic scatter plot, which is a no-frills way for comparing two variables without sizing, without anything. And it's quite useful for quickly discerning if there is a relationship between those two values and decide, to proceed down the road and investigate further and visualize further your data or not. Is our bubble chart we have already used, and as we've seen, it's quite powerful. There's scatter with filter that gives an option to filter your scatter plot based on a category of data. There's the dot plot, which is close to a B swarm that we have already created, and the different categories of data are visualized in their own space. They do not cluster between around them. And the B swarm, as we can see, it's similar to the scatter plot, but our data points kind of look like bees because they can essentially be plotted in any area of the axis. So they can be essentially concentrated about, while the dot plot is just the data points are just on the y-axis. We have a connected dot plot available that captures the evolution of a value between and the points are represented by a dot and essentially connected by straight line segments, and essentially visualizes and trending data over intervals of time, in a sense, a time series. We have our Hans Rosling chart, named after the guru of animated charts, Hans Rosling, where everything is available: size, colors, and filter, and categories. And you can essentially create a timeline skater template that we will be going through in our next webinar, in our advanced webinar session. We have a box plot, which is quite useful for comparing basic features of multiple distributions of data. And finally, the violin plot, which is an alternative way of presenting the basic features of multiple distributions, similar to the box plot. And also available, sorry for overrunning a bit, our resources, which are help docs, are always a useful repository to run back to if you need any help or have any questions about the Flourish template or the Flourish platform. We have our blog where you can stay informed about new features that we develop, and the Flourish newsletter as well. The FT Visual vocabulary is always a very, very useful resource for deciding what kind of visualization you should be creating based on what you want to showcase. And Mapsape.org is the one-stop shop for every kind of edits and work that you need to do in order to make your GeoJSON file work before you enter it into Flourish. Thank you, everyone. It has been a real pleasure, and I hope you enjoyed our basic scatter template journey. It's been lovely not seeing you, but talking with you. I hope you found it. I hope you found this useful. Thank you very much. I hope you have a good evening or whatever the time zone you may be. Enjoy the rest of your day.